All right, welcome to our final session this afternoon in this room. This is exploring Veeam 12's Unbreakable backups. Our presenter I'd like to introduce, I'm Craig Schellrup at the Network Center, and our presenter is Roger Lund. He's a solution architect at Network Center. Roger evangelizes virtualization by night and is a solution architect at Network Center, Inc. by day. He has over 20 years of experience in the industry, specializing in virtualization, cloud, discovery, disaster recovery, backup, networking, and storage. Roger has spoken at conferences such as VMworld and is Tech Field Day delegate. He is also a VMware vExpert and social media influencer and blogger at www.vbrainstorm.com. He's going to kind of go over fortifying and tailoring the Veeam backup infrastructure, talk a little bit about immutable backups and some other things. So with that being said, welcome, Roger.
Thanks for having me today, guys. So what do we want to talk about? I mean, I was planning on talking about Veeam, but we can talk about fly fishing or photography or grilling, barbecue. You know, I'm open. No, today we're going to talk about Veeam 12 and what I call unbreakable backups, right? So I know we've all kind of seen ransomware or heard of it. Can I get a hand raise? Like, who's heard of ransomware? Okay, that's the world we live in, right? So that's what we're going to focus on today. I'm going to go through how to set up a Linux hardened repository, just kind of walk through the high level stuff. And then we're going to talk about setting up scale out repo, how to put a copy of it on the cloud. So, get here. So, you can see it now. So, I've got quite a bit to talk about. Why we're talking about ransomware, immutability. We talk about Veeam's 3-2-1 rule. Why does that matter, right? I'm going to talk about the tech that I'm going to be talking about. Like, what is it? Like, what are the components of the lab that I'm going to demo at the end? How to set up Linux repository, how to set up scale out repository, how to add Wasabi. So, feel free to interrupt me. I've been doing this Veeam since 2006. So I've got a few years with it. So if you've got questions, hit me up as we go along. Just before we get too deep into this, who has not used Veeam? Okay, so everybody's familiar with that. I'm assuming that this is going to be a pretty technical crowd of Veeam users, but wanted to kind of ask that up front. This will be right up you guys' alley. So, challenge, ransomware is increasing, right? Everybody's heard of someone getting affected by ransomware. And unfortunately, the numbers are kind of crazy. I'm not going to read off the slide deck, but if we haven't experienced it firsthand, we know when someone that has, right? And challenge is that we have to kind of expect that we're going to run into it. That's the life we're living today, is one of living with bad guys among, right? So how do we survive that? We're using Veeam. We've established that people know what it is, but have you recovered from ransomware? How do you prepare yourself to do that, right? So we're going to kind of talk through that today, and hopefully you'll get lucky and we won't have to go through this process, right, of restoring data. But if you want to be prepared, prepare for a scenario where you have to do it, right? So that's what we're covering today. What is immutability, right? Everybody thinks, well, I've got Veeam today. I replicated offsite. Good enough, right? Not necessarily, right? We're really talking about here is making it so no one can modify that data on the other side. So, a write once, read many type of, right? We've all been talking about that for years, but how do we enforce that? How do I, on the Linux side, if I'm using a Linux hardened repo, what does that mean? Can't I just go in as the user and delete that data, right? And so we'll talk about some of the steps that we can take to prevent that. from an unauthorized user. So it's about things like compliance and data integrity as well, depending on your industry, right? But it sounds daunting, but it won't be so bad when I kind of go through today. But you know, uh, operational insurance, right? A lot of you have a cyber insurance policy that maybe requires some of this stuff, or if it isn't now, it will be. That's kind of part of why it's important to walk through this today. So, backup strategies. So, who has heard of the 3-2-1 rule? Okay. So, realistically, we're talking about multiple copies of your data on more than one media, right? And why that's important is for resiliency as a company. Kind of the same thing as we talked about last time, but um, we look at this, how this is in Veeam, because we've got different components, different tiers of a scale-out repository. We've got a local higher performance repository, which we'll talk about today, which is most of the time in our case with IX systems. Okay. We'll talk about the capacity tier, being Wasabi today, and what that means and how we can make that immutable, right? And then you can talk about the use cases for archive as well. Today we're not focusing on archive, we're really just talking about how to get the other two to be immutable. But realistically, the third tier is the same as the second tier from a technology standpoint. Okay, S3 as well. So it's just going to be one more landing zone for old data. So when Veeam talks about double play, triple play, that's what they're really talking about, the difference between capacity and archive. Like I said, today we're talking about the performance and the capacity. Long time archive is something we'll probably talk about separately. Why Wasabi? Who has heard of Wasabi? Okay. So last time I got up here and spoke for you guys, we talked about using Azure and AWS. Wasabi is another platform that is S3 compliant. Why are we talking about it? Because in Veeam 12, they became integrated as an option for a capacity tier. Okay, when you walk through it, but you can just click on. It's an option. You don't have to do anything custom, right? Wasabi type of information, so it's very easy. They've got lots of testing and Q&A that they've done together, right, to make this work. So what about Wasabi? It's very low cost, very fast. You don't pay to put the data up or pull it down, right? So you pay capacity, and that you don't have to worry about pushing data up or down. You will have some sort of a cost to delete data before a certain period, but it's still a pretty small cost compared to your big public cloud, right? How do they do that? Well, it's designed for this type of work, right? It has a NAS type design. Why scale out? Why are we talking about scale out repositories? Because that's what Veeam uses to be able to move between tiers in their product, right? And so there are some requirements. Most of it is the enterprise, either the essentials or enterprise up versions of Veeam. Or if you look at like our MSP offering with the Veeam program, we can do a rental model. So there's some requirements there, but it's pretty low cost to look at like version of Veeam that supports that. But can't use the free version, put it that way. So talked about this a little bit, but we're going to go through the following: Veeam, high performance repository capacity. We'll talk a little bit about archive, not too much. And then we're going to go through first Linux repository. I'll talk a little bit about how do you set that up. Does anybody know that type of stuff? So, and then scale repository. And then at the very end, I'll talk. We'll go through demo, and then again, I'm gonna I'll talk a little bit about Veeam 12. Yep. Hardware. Why does hardware matter? Does anybody have any thoughts? Hi. On the spot. Make you sweat. All right, so why hardware matters, right? Speed of recovery. Okay. I mean, Veeam will allow you to pick what you want to put it on. Like, you're not buying a complete solution, right? So, I mean, technically, I could take a 10-year-old PC and load a supported operating system on there somehow and probably get Veeam to install, and I could make it like my repository, my proxy, my WAN accelerator, all of the things. And I could back up to a 6-year-old SATA drive, right? Or ID drive or something I have laying around, right? And then I come to restore, and guess what? It'll take days, if at all. So that matters, right? If you're using a NAS, like we're going to be talking about here today, connectivity to that NAS matters between your Veeam product, right? If you have a 10100 switch and you've got your NAS hooked up to it, it's going to take a long time, right? And it doesn't sound like a big deal until you need to pull it all down, right? We'll talk about internet speeds too, right? Talking about Wasabi. Well, probably need at least 200 meg internet, because otherwise you need to pull all your data down. Now maybe you can talk to your ISP and they say, hey, in an event, call us and we'll give you a grace period to go up to gig. But make sure you have that conversation before you have the event. And there's lots of different components here. We have a server, we got the NAS, the networking, lots of pieces of the puzzle, right? And I don't expect you all to just go back to the office and build this yourselves. I mean, that's where we come in, right? Around, even if it's just like, here's what I'm thinking, does it make sense? So my hardware components. So I've got 3 Cisco UCS servers, 10 gig networking, VMware 8, U2, U1. I've got an IX Systems scale system with about 40 terabytes disk in it. I've got Wasabi S3, Amazon S3 in there. Glacier set up. I don't have any jobs going into those other 2 though, but they're set up in Veeam, right? I've got the Veeam. Oh, I didn't put it in here, but I have components of Veeam. I've got scale out repo, hardware repository set up, right? I've got a couple backup jobs. We'll talk about that later. So, questions on this, because a little technical here. Names again. No. Before we start, I want to talk a little bit about Linux. Have you guys, who here has done a fairly recent install of Linux and supports it in their environment? Only 1, 2, 3. So let's talk about that. So what does that mean, right? Now today, you're probably just running Veeam on Windows Server. Now you're adding a component that you have, right? What's that mean? It's very easy to go grab Ubuntu, because everybody's heard of it. But it might not be easiest to get enterprise level support on, right? So, I'll recommend something like a Red Hat. If you've never touched Linux before, it's about the same as a Windows, server license cost. But get really good support from IBM, right? If you do have experience with Ubuntu, but you want support, you can get Ubuntu Advantage support, right? The nice thing about that is you can buy it afterwards, which is kind of the opposite of Red Hat. Red Hat, you have to buy the license and support up front. Ubuntu, you can basically take it till you break it, and then get support, open support case, and they'll still help you. And I actually have validated that with them. They said that's fine. They're pretty open to that. So play around with patching and setting up a Linux box if you've never done it before. Understand things like how to partition Linux. And again, if you aren't familiar with it, talk to us. But keep it simple. So if you Google that, there's some Linux guides out there. There is I've got the link down the bottom. It's a little bit hard to see, but they have a backup security hardening guideline out there, which talks about using some different security principles, how to set it up, things to do, not do, things like that. So, don't add 15 users to the sudo file using Ubuntu. Don't, there's a guide when you're installing this, when you're setting this up for Veeam. I'll walk through it, but it's like you're making a user, don't give it admin rights. Like, don't add it to the sudo, right? If you do it temporarily and then remove it afterwards, stuff like that. Why? Because then from Veeam, you can start doing things that you shouldn't be able to do. So it's kind of providing that extra layer of security. So, yeah, probably could go on for more detail here. If you're not familiar with LVM, consider whether or not you want to use that for the partition you're going to be setting up. So, like, generally, let's say you've got DAS, NAS, you can do direct attach Linux, right? You can mount the NAS NFS mount point to this, and then format that. There's a lot of different things you can do there. You could do a VM, have IX systems be NFS in the back end of the VMware host, and then you have a local disk. There's lots of things you can do here, but if you're not familiar with LVM, probably don't go down that road. Just do a regular partition, give it a mount point like Veeam repo. Simple, right? LVM gets to be cool. You can resize, you can do some dynamic stuff, but if you've never played with it, it's probably not the best first time in all your back. So otherwise, there's some complications, right? So if you don't set up correctly, and things like, let's say it's iSCSI mount. iSCSI to the guest from a NAS is an easy way to present it to physical or VM Linux. However, you don't have that service set to start. You reboot, your mount doesn't come back up, and you don't have backups accessible. Or if you're not auto-mounting the file system, same thing. Or if the UUID changes for some reason because you resize it, something won't come back up. There's some little things there, right? Don't be intimidated by it. Just play around with it first. It's easy to set up this like as a test repo, run one copy job to it for a month or two. Make sure you're comfortable with it if you're not going to ask for. Let me know. I will be providing copies of this. If you can't read it, don't worry about it too much. So, but basically, once you add this repo and you get it functional, following the Veeam documentation, you just set this up as another repo. Biggest difference here, other than setting up a regular Linux repo, is we're setting up a one-time user. Right? So they have us go in and create a local user and temporarily give that access, right, for sudo. And then you add it here, go through adding it, and then you'd go back and remove that user or disable it from Linux totally that was set up. So that user doesn't exist or it's disabled, right? That way, system, you can't access that account again, right? So again, we're talking about security. You might have to re-add it when you do an update. Remember that. Like when there's a patch, we'll try to connect and be like, hey, that user account doesn't exist. Now you have to go back and create the account, re-enable it, re-add it to sudo. So there's some things you have to do. But then once you've added it as an operating system, now you can add it as a repo, just like a regular repo here, just like you're doing Windows. Direct attached, next, hit populate. Hit populate here. It shows the space on the left side. And again, it could be LVM, it could be Mount Point, it could be an iSCSI, it could be NFS, it could be SMB, it doesn't really matter. But, you'll see the capacity. Here is where you'll set up the immutability, right? I'd recommend probably longer than that, but set up, whatever your time's going to be there. There's a couple things here that, you want to maybe have a conversation with me about, about like settings wise, but this is generally how I set it up. You can go through next. Okay. You got it. Just the repo's been added right into your Veeam. Now, you could just use it. Talk about that right. You wouldn't have to use it as a scale out repo. If you just wanted another repo to do copy jobs to, you could do that. Right now, you have a hardened repository. You set that immutability date, 30 days, 50 days, whatever it is, and that data is going to be there for that amount of time, right? You can't go into Veeam and right click and say delete, right? Stuff. So that's an option. You could, have this offsite. You could have it dumped to your normal one, and then now you can do a copy job to this location, and that data is going to be stuck there until that expiration date happens, ages off. So that is an option. It just isn't meeting that 3-2-1, right? Still gives you multiple copies of the data. Maybe you want to do that plus go have a copy of the cloud. Maybe you want to have 2 of these, right? So it's super easy to take, especially if you have like an old NAS or a SAN or something, install Linux on a server and hook it up to it. Now you've got full of disk, right? On that SAN, wipe the disk if you know how, set up RAID 6, a hot spare so you can lose a disk or 2. Good. Again, just copy your data, but something to go through. I mean, IX Systems, I don't know if you're familiar with them, you haven't talked to those guys, but they have a product called TrueNAS that used to be called FreeNAS. Familiar with that? That product has a free version, right? It's called TrueNAS Core. Functionally, it's really close to the enterprise version. It just doesn't have high availability or software support. Okay. That being said, you have an older server with a bunch of local disks, an older SAN, you want to hook up to a server, you can just install that free version on that hardware, put it in one of your other locations, and now you have another second, fast copy that you can beam, right? Again, depends on how nerdy you want to get, but I've done it often. In fact, I'm running the free version in my lab. Okay? I didn't want to spend the money out of my own personal checkbook for lab. So performance-wise, there's no limitation, right? So, I mean, if you had enough disk behind that thing, the free version was just as fast as that. You just can't do upgrades without downtime. Can't call their support 2 a.m. because you deleted the wrong snapshot. So scale out repositories. Has anybody walked through this process? A couple of you? Okay. So I think version 10, does that sound right? Scale repositories became a thing. It lets you, have different tiers of storage for Veeam. It does something called like a offload task. So what does that mean, right? It means that once your backup job finishes, it's an extend copy. This depends on your setting. Okay. You can do 2 things. You can say, hey, once the backup job copies, I want a copy of this to go out to the capacity. That's a checkbox I'll walk you through. Or I can say, after X number of days, I want to put a copy of this data out. More of an aging, right? Or based on that aging thing, I can say, I want to do it after, 36 days, and or if I get to 72% of my free space on my repository. So you can do some interesting things there from a space perspective. Again, maybe you don't have a ton of local disk, but it's super fast, like Flash NAS. You've got 5 days, right, or something that you want to keep on-prem. That's an interesting way to get your data, and make it fast recoverability, and then pump the rest of it out to Wasabi or wherever your S3 destination is. And then you can recover quickly as long as you don't have a national disaster or something on site. But you still have the ability to have that data, out in the cloud, right? And then when you go do a restore, and I'll walk through kind of what the process looks like, but you have the restore window where you have pick your restore point. It'll show that there's a copy both in your capacity and your performance tier. Right? So if one's missing, you'll see that. And if it's missing, it'll just pull from the other one. So it's like choose a different point. So questions? I've been talking pretty fast. Talk slower. Yes. Yes. So like if you had your hardened repository, I could say I'd want that to be 2 weeks there and then immutable for 2 weeks. And then I could have it be immutable, at the other layer at 90 days or, or something like that. And then your backup job obviously got its own, time, but it's like the data is not going anywhere. It's stuck in immutability. I'll walk through some of that here. Other questions? No. Now you can do scale out repository with REFS. Okay, I wouldn't recommend it. I've had some scenarios where you do Windows updates, something weird goes wonky. Now you reboot your Windows server, you have no backup. Your volume is like uninitialized. So ran into some of those scenarios. So I wouldn't go that direction. I would recommend doing, Linux. It's pretty easy. If you have a NAS, just do iSCSI and do a Linux VM. That's probably the easiest way. You can do an NFS mount as well. NFS works perfectly fine, just not quite as quick. Okay, you're not hitting more than if you don't want to do more than like 300 megabit a second from a restorability standpoint, that's not a big deal. NFS is fine. You're getting it about 100 meg a second. But if you've got an NAS with over 40 drives and you want to be able to get better performance than that, you have an SLA to meet, then iSCSI is just faster, right? Now, there's other things to consider there. We start talking about high performance recoverability. You start talking about block storage. Start talking about having dedicated switching, and because if you lose iSCSI connectivity when you're backing things up, you might have data loss. Blah 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 blah. So it's not as big of a deal with backups, but we should probably have that conversation if we start talking about like, hey, I need to be able to recover my entire environment in an hour. There's a lot of demand on gear when you start. Most of us, it's not a big deal because we're like, oh, if I can get it back in a day, But, banks, medical, sometimes that becomes a bigger deal. So I've got customers that have, IX unit systems with like 48 drives, and they can get, 500 megabit a second, big MB on writes. Not so those jobs now are taking minutes, not hours. So if you've got, more than 20 terabytes, might be worth. Okay, going through. So this is a new thing in 12. In 11, it didn't show a little lock. So that's the only reason I really wanted to talk about this today. But it's kind of cool. You can tell which one it is without the name now. Because before you had to like remember it, pick the right one. If you had like 20 repositories or something, a little more painful there. But now, yeah, it's got the little hardened repo checkbox. So kind of cool. Here we're going through the policy. I can talk a little bit about this too. So you've got a couple options in data placement. You can do, so by default, it's locality. Okay. So it's gonna, once it dumps a backup job, to the performance tier, it's always going to dump that backup to that performance. However, if you have multiple NASs, you can't have multiple NASs at that tier. You could have two hardened repos and check them both and have them there. Maybe that doesn't make as much sense. You're like, well, but one's faster than the other one, right? One's SSD. Now you can start doing performance and you can get a little creative down here. And so you can do some cool things there, right? Again, maybe you've got like an old flash array with a terabyte of disk, and you're like, or you just say, hey, I have a server, I'm gonna put 1 terabyte drives in it, right? RAID 1, make that a separate hardened repo, and I want my domain controllers, right? I want to restore those really fast, or maybe I have to do instant restore on those things. I want to run them from that location, right? So, anyways, you can do some interesting things here. We'll kind of gloss over this, but we could spend some time in the future, or if you guys want to talk about that on the phone or whatever. Kind of cool. I've got customers that have like 3 or 4 NASs, and they'll have 2 in each location, and they control where it goes based on the type of job. So you can get kind of granular there. Depends on how much time you want to spend in your back. Some guys like playing around with that or the other. Here's where we're gonna go through. By default, this is where I was talking about the different, it moves it out after certain times. By default, it does this. I check the top one because I'm like, I want a copy of that data go up as soon as the backup job finishes. Okay, you don't have to do that, but I choose to do that because I feel like the whole reason I'm doing this is so I have a immutable copy of the data, right? But bandwidth was a challenge, right? Maybe that's a different story. So you can play around with that. I always recommend the next book. I didn't do it here, but check that encryption on the bottom, that encryption key. Just important. Does anybody not encrypt their backups? No one will tell me. If you aren't encrypting your backups, please encrypt your backup. Please use a randomly generated backup key. Heck, I can store it for you and mail it to you if you need me to. But I mean, you can randomly generate that and make that secure. You only need it if you restore, right? So, and it can get stored in Veeam. So, like, as long as your Veeam server doesn't go bye-bye, it's normal operation. But if you had to restore your Veeam server, you need that. Don't store your passwords and your encryption files on your SAN. Put it in the file cabinet. Keep a copy in the cloud, right? Because like if you have a fire, so not maybe we'll have an earthquake, but less chances here, right? So this is where I had the Amazon before. So I'm going to add another S3, right? As you can see here, there's quite a few. However, not all these support immutability. Okay, so in this case, the ones that do is Amazon, now Azure, and Wasabi. Now there's ways to do it with regular S3. I mean, if you're really nerdy, you can do TrueNAS, and then you can do a container plugin top of it. TrueNAS scale, talking about not regular TrueNAS, core, and there's a difference. One's Unix, one's Linux, one's made to run containers, one's really just for storage. But you're getting creative, and now you're doing your own. Like, I want to build my own cloud, right? I want to get crazy. I've got 16 SANs, and they're all under support still, and I want to do my own thing. And you can say, sure, I can install scale, install container plugin. There's guides out there if you Google it. You can set up immutability on S3. That works. I have clients doing it. Pretty nerdy, like me, but it does work. And then you can add that. I think you just go through the top one, S3 compatible, and you just put in your credentials and your public IP, or you probably want to set up a DNS, public DNS record for it. Put it at a colo or something like that, right? but it is doable, right? So you can build your own if you really feel like you want to get into the weeds. In Veeam, let's kind of get into it as much as you want, right? The plus and the negative of the platform. So today, talking about Wasabi, because in 12, now that green icon is here, right? And it's just inexpensive, it's easy, it's fast. We're going to talk about that. We're going to go in, we're going to name it up here, see if you catch it, make a typo. Don't do that. I'll tell you why. So then put it in the region. You have to go to your bucket settings. So I didn't walk through that, right? But in S3, you go create a bucket. It tells you what region you're in. Very first time I did this, didn't pay attention to what region I was in. I kept typing in my credentials. They kept failing. What's going on? You know, like go look at my Azure Central there. Okay, we'll put it in here, and it worked, right? I actually think I had to ask Mike the first time because, Mike, what am I missing? Pagon's like, well, did you try Central? So, I'll talk about this bottom one, this connection. Normally it's direct. That means there's a direct connection to the cloud from the proxy. If you have a very secure network, that might get challenging. You can build a proxy just for this and then allow that traffic from that one IP to your firewall to the public IP. You know, there's things there. Security is important, so I sigh, but I have a client doing it. It's kind of a pain, but doable, right? So it's just like you want to have another Windows license, but if you've got additional licensing, you know, not a big deal. But by default, it connects right from the backup server, direct to the endpoint. If you have firewall rules that are really strict, you're going to need to create a rule, right? To be able to talk from Veeam server out to Wasabi, and if you go out, Wasabi's got a list of IPs. It's about 50, it's a big list. But I have done that with FortiGate. I don't know if were anybody in the FortiGate? Yeah. So I do a lot of FortiGate stuff. So if you guys want to talk about that sometime, hit me up. So here's the bucket. If you look at the bucket, I was going to say key at the end. What did I put? All right. Here we go. So don't incorrectly type this, because once you have backup jobs going out here, you're not changing it. Okay? I did this, I don't know, 4:30 in the afternoon, right? After doing a FortiGate cutovers or, doing some FortiGate work, and I was, trying to get this done. I've done this so much that I whizzed through it, and I presented this the next morning, and Chris is like, hey, look at this typo. And I'm like, oh yeah, I'll go fix it. A couple days went by. Now I've got 4 days of backups out there. Go out there, and I'm like, not changing it, right? We'll talk about why not to do that. So luckily, I didn't put anything profound in there. But anyways, keep this in mind. Why is that important? Maybe you want 2 buckets, one for test, one for prod. Okay, you can just have one bucket with multiple Scala repos. It works. Would I recommend that? No. Why? Because how do I tell them how much one is costing now over the other if I need to go out and do cast analytics? I can't. It's almost impossible. Like, you'd have to open support case up and be like, in Wasabi, you can see per bucket cost, but I can't see per file. if I could, Veeam's got lots of files, right? It'd just be a nightmare. So don't do that. Create a bucket, call it test, call it prod, call it, the site location, whatever you're going to come up with. Think about that ahead of time. So in my lab, I set a limit. Why? It's because I didn't want to run up a $40, $50 a month bill just for this. It's pretty reasonable. Less than $20 a month per terabyte, right? With support and all that stuff figured in. But it's like I just, I'm like, I'm going to try to not big bill it. I would never check that top box for 1 terabyte. If you wanted to consider it, set 100 terabytes. But again, don't want to do is have this run for 6 months, go take a 2-week vacation. On the vacation, it's failing. You're not checking your emails, and then you come back to ransomware attack. Right? Not a good day. So I don't recommend setting that top bucket, checkbox. So you can do costing, you can do alarms, and Wasabi. You'll see the cost. Again, at the cost we're talking about, it's pretty reasonable, right? We're not talking thousands and thousands of dollars a month. You can see there's immutable date. That's the one I was talking about. Different, right? Now, it gets more complicated depending on the type of job you're doing, because, copy jobs are treated differently than replication job. All those things get a little bit different. We're talking about here, but first doing regular job, you can lock this immutability in. Pretty much hit next here. And now you can see there's Wasabi that wasn't there before. Now you can see I changed I checked the top one. Hey, look, I have a encryption key. Took my own advice. Excellent. I listen to myself sometimes, right? My wife says I don't. So again, I like to get a copy up top, make sure the encryption key's there. We hit next, apply. Right. So now we got a little bit of time. I'm going to attempt to do a demo. How this goes. So over. I'm tall. Good thing I don't have clear text. All right, so I've already VPN'd in. I was probably doing updates or something in here. We'll see. Oh, looks like I wasn't even logged in. So this is my lab that's hosted in St. Cloud at a private data center. You can see I've got some iPerf stuff and license file. This is like everybody else's desktop, right? It's not monthly. We're gonna wait for it to boot or load. Give this comments. I've got, let's see, what should I not talk about? So I said I had 10 getting working. I have Cisco Nexus 5548s in here. Don't run those at home, they're really loud. In the lab, it's fine. Cisco UCS M4Ss. So they're like 1U Cisco UCS servers. They're extremely loud. They are about as loud as a hairdryer. You open up the second door into the data center and it's like, but they're free. And the client, I put Nutanix in and they're like, here you go, you can have these. So they're running, I've actually got vSAN set up. That's maybe something else we can talk about in the future, but What am I opening this up? Veeam. Was it gonna go show you vSAN? But Intel was nice enough to donate me some Optane drives, so I do have vSAN set up in this lab as well. If you guys ever want to look at see what vSAN Express architecture looks like. For the software, be patient. That's a great question. It depends. I'll say no. So Veeam is licensed either by the socket, which is their legacy licensing, or by the instance, which is their new licensing model, which universal licensing. Those of you that are still in socket licenses, that'll go away eventually. I don't know if they've given us a hard. I want to say it's 26, but I don't know for sure that date. But that could be. Depends on like how far out your renewal is. I renewed for 10 years.
Yeah, depends on what you bitch about the drastic change if you have really large capacities.
Yeah. So the old school way was by the socket, right? What stunk about that is if you had to put a temporary host in, or you're doing maintenance and you needed to shuffle things around, and then it's like you try to run it back up and it fails, or it'll work, and then next time it runs it'll fail because it used a license over here that was located over here, and all this stuff, right? So now it's basically per VM. You buy them in chunks of I think 10 and up, 25. Yeah, something like that. So now the cool thing is as an MSP, we can license that as a rental model month to month. So don't abuse that because it's annoying. No, but if for example you had to spin up a VM or two, it's easy for us to go in and change that on the back end for a couple months until you can do whatever. And we don't, in my opinion, we don't really mark that up very much because it's actually a wash over 3 years, about the same if you buy it or not. So keep that in mind if you ever have to do that. One of the cool things about the license is you can do 10 rental through us and have some really good flexibility. Maybe have a different Veeam server somewhere else at another site, and then if you ever had an event, you can restore it there. So it's kind of cool to have that flexibility. If you need to back a desktop up, it's super flexible. So, okay, what do we want to look at? Okay, so I've got a couple backup jobs, so I'm going to do two things. I want to walk you through how to create a backup job, look through the settings of one of them. I want to walk you through restore. So, Craig, how am I doing in time? Perfect.
Oh, that's not.
That's perfect. That's all I need. So, backup job is really close to the same. Pick a search for a VM. I don't have anything named that. You know what? Let's just do all of these. Let's just do it the easy way. There's my Cisco cluster. Jump. Now, by default, it'll show up at whatever your last repository was. So you're gonna have to come out here, and you see, I was actually using this one by default, right? So we want to come down here and we want to pick that new scale out repository, right? So pick your retention policy, just like you normally do. By the way, don't ever do restore points. Anybody want to know why? Your hands? Question or thoughts? So let's say I'm like, I'm going to do 7 restore points instead of 7 days. Okay. Have a failure tomorrow. I go and rerun it, run successfully. I didn't tell anybody. Next guy comes in 2 hours later. He goes and reruns it. It runs successfully. The next morning, the next guy runs and reruns it because it errored again, and now you got 3 days of retention, right? So you can kind of get yourself into a corner pretty fast. So keep it at days, okay? So basically, you just pick your new location. Everything else is the same, okay? Now, restoring if I can move my mouse, is really simple and no different than before. And I just want to show you real quick. We're going to do guest. This is probably what you're going to do. We're doing Windows. Want to restore from a file server, right? You want to make sure that you can see what you're restoring. So I've got one I named real clearly, restore file demo. I have 413 restore points because I'm doing them every hour. You know, now again, when you're doing backup jobs, the more often you do them, the faster they run. Okay, so don't think that you should always just do every 24 hours, once a day. You know, as long as you have, again, fast enough networking, fast enough SAN, doing more often isn't bad, it's faster. So, okay, so again, kind of hard to see, but if we move this over here, move this over here, I can see now the different tiers those jobs are at. Okay. So if somebody shut down the data center, now it's just going to say capacity tier back then, you know, because we didn't have getting backups, you know, but, or if it's airing, but we're just going to go through the process here. This is going to, again, if you don't have 10 gig, this might take a while. Pretty fast here. I'm only backing up a few megs of data, so, but it just maybe take a minute or so to pop up. Or two. Any questions while we wait for this? Okay. Yeah, is there any online? No one wants to see how to back up BOS? OS2 warp drive? No? Okay. Well. Okay, here we go. Getting close. All right. So, you know, obviously we don't want to look at the C drive, right? We want to come out here. We want to find the, we really care about vendor PDFs. I mean, this is really what we're here for. You know, we want to say, okay, you know, I really liked Lenovo when I was at this conference. I saved all the files out here, right? I want to restore this, right? I want to restore it. I just put it in the local server, right? I have a E on my local server. There we go, right? Let's go see if it's there. So down to E, restore to, look at, what was the file I restored, guys? Google. This one. Make sure it opens. There we go. Right. Same process as a regular backup job. There was no differences really, right? So the idea here is, like I said before, keep it simple. But now you've got immutable backups end to end, right? And hopefully if you're a ransomware event, it won't be a non-issue. So I have, and just disconnect here, I have had to restore Wasabi, and I was able to pull down a full line rate from the night before. Full gig line rate. So that's through us. There are some differences if you buy it direct. Don't get support. I believe that there's some tiering differences on their end too, so keep that in mind. You can sure go direct to Wasabi, and it'd be a little bit cheaper sometimes. But when you need support, it's nice to have that. We don't charge extra for support. Where it's it's like a all you can need support model when you go direct, so it's cost per incident, you know, different things. So keep that in mind. So, all right, guys. Well, thank you for coming. Hit me up.